Hello everybody and welcome to OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the latest set Silver Tempest, make sure you check out the Poketown store where you can get 5% off your order using code OmniPoke. Today, Joe and I are taking a look at the brand new Scarlet and Violet EX cards revealed, the first set of Gen 9. Pretty exciting. We initially had these reveals back in August at Worlds, where they always sort of like to give a little teaser of what's coming up for the next year. And they revealed sort of half of Miraidon and Koraidon EX, and they said the EX mechanic was coming back, but that was about it. But we're now just over a month away from the first set being released in Japan. You can see here it's going to be released in Japan on January the 20th, which is only like 5 weeks away, which is pretty crazy. And then probably what's going to come with that is rotation when we get the set in February in the West. So this is going to be like a big turning point for the TCG. We're going to be moving into Gen 9, and we're going to we're starting to get an idea of where we're going. It looks like they wanted to slow down the format and that kind of thing. So we finally are getting to have a bit of a look at what these new cards are going to look like, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. We've also got a new rule box to go over as well today, so lots to get into.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the one thing that is worth noting is a few of these cards, typically in these first initial reveals, they show a lot of generic early Pokemon that you find in the games and that they do in the early reveals of the trailers and stuff. So there's actually not masses and masses of things to look at in terms of playability or whatever here. We're going to have a bit of a tinfoil hat session and talk about, like Joe said, that rule box more so. But yeah, I think one of the most notable things is just this new art style of these cards. Each year each, I guess, generation, we get a bit of an upgrade on how the art style looks. And I think me and you are both not really convinced yet on the new art style. This sort of like faded... slightly faded colouring on the generic cards. Something that's going to take a little while to get used to. It feels very reminiscent of the Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald era, which obviously was where the EX mechanic was first introduced. Just comparing this Growlithe with this one here, you can kind of see that similarity where you've got sort of the darker edge and the lighter body of text, which is interesting. So yeah, I think it's going to take some getting used to, but the card arts themselves, I think we're both pretty enthusiastic about. More great arts as always, which is great to see. So yeah, jumping into the cards, Smoliv, pretty generic. Growlithe, again, pretty generic. I think the most notable thing about this one is actually the 90 HP. I mean, again, comparing to that Growlithe from Sandstorm, which was obviously back in, I guess, 20 years ago now, but that's 50 HP. We've basically doubled the HP over the past few years, which is notable because obviously one of the biggest things about evolving rule boxes, as you can see, we've got an Arcanine to talk about momentarily, is the HP of the basics can sometimes be sort of hindered by spread attacks and that kind of thing. So making these a bit chunkier and making them stick around for a little bit longer is hopefully beneficial in terms of trying to keep them or not be ruined by sort of spread strategies and sniping strategies, as well as just having a 70 damage attack on a basic is also pretty crazy. I mean, it's 3 energy, so it's unlikely you're going to be using this, but again, it's just further bumping up the stats of these very generic cards, which is kind of power creep, kind of not, but yeah, worth noting at least.
Yeah, super important in that Sableye world. But let's talk about the sort of the main topic we want to touch on here, which is the Terastal rule box that's actually just beneath the name of this Arcanine EX. You'll notice that the EX itself has little Terastal crystals. It was something that they, again, it was the last thing they showed us on the trailer, actually, just that little different type of EX. There will be lots of other EXs that have that normal, like, sort of grey, silvery, filled-in logo, but with the Terastal EXs, we get a new rule box on the card, and this, we imagine, won't get shut off by Path of the Peak, because it's not an ability, it's a completely separate zone. So think of it similar to good old traits, ancient traits that we had revealed in the XY era. I think it started off in Ancient Origin, something like that. Really interesting little tidbits that we got, in addition to cards that basically just sat around and couldn't be interacted with at all. The one we have for Arcanine here says that this Pokemon doesn't take any damage from attacks while on the bench. Now, I think it's going to be pretty underwhelming if the entire Terastal mechanic that we're getting from the video game, which I've only just finished and I think is awesome, by the way, is going to be limited to just this one bit of text. Because although it's very relevant to have inbuilt bench protection, especially with some of the Pokemon that are currently relevant in the game, I would think it would be a bit of a letdown to just have this text on every single card. So I would imagine we have no confirmation right now, but it could be that different types of Pokemon could all share the same thing. So if you're going into a Fire Terastal type, they all have this bench protection effect. Or it could be more similar to Ancient Traits, where it was just kind of like a smorgasbord. There was a handful of random cards that had speedy evolution, some had extra healing, like buffed style Ancient Traits, some had things where they couldn't be interacted with by trainers and supporters. So they have all these really interesting effects back in the day, and I feel like they were almost arbitrarily put on things. And I kind of like that aspect based on sort of what terrestrialization these Pokemon are going to, and just really being unique things that could make different cards more interesting. Do you have anything else to say on the terrestrial mechanic, Jack?
I don't think so necessarily from that sort of this specific text mechanic. It's really interesting, like you say, that this seems like a really underwhelming effect for like the big deal in the games, right?
Right.
It's the Dynamaxing had like VMAXs, which realistically the big mechanic was 3 prizes on those, but like that was a massive thing. And just having bench barrier, obviously I'd rather have a bench barrier than not, but it's going to feel really underwhelming if there's not at least some variety. I think like you say, realistically the most likely is we're going to have a handful of different ones, but we'll have to wait and see. The other thing that's interesting is obviously we can see the little TERA crystal on top of the Arcanine's head. It will be interesting to see whether we actually do perhaps have some Pokemon that don't TERA into their own type, because obviously this is a fire type Arcanine normally, but maybe we could see like a lightning type Arcanine and that had the lightning type crystal. That could still be something they do with the TERA mechanic, and maybe this is just a generic thing for all of the Terastal Pokemon, I should say, but they haven't quite revealed everything yet, in that maybe we can get multiple types of Terastal Pokemon, so Pokemon you normally would expect to be one type will be a different type. I think there's still some potential there. That could maybe be one of the kind of things where every 4 sets they introduce like a new mini mechanic. Maybe we'll sort of start looking at that then. But it feels like a massive missed opportunity, especially given that the TCG has way less types than the VG as well. Right. They don't have to do as much work in trying to work out how all these different terrestrial types work and how that kind of thing. There's a way more limitations in TCG, which in this case would actually be helpful for them in terms of trying to make it a bit more of a type-based thing. So I'm hopeful that this isn't just it, but if it is, I'm going to be a little bit disappointed. But the rest of the card is also pretty interesting, to be fair. It's actually pretty much a rinse and repeat of Reshizard, which is quite funny. Obviously now on a stage 1 Pokemon, but Raging Claws for 2 fire. It's dealing 30 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. Now, 280 HP is obviously a huge amount of HP, and whilst there's certain decks we know right now that can reach that and stuff like that, a lot of things aren't going to be able to reach this, and we're losing a lot of different tools. We have to think about rotation going into this as well, because more than likely, I think realistically, when Scarlet and Violet come out, we're going to be rotating into that E block. So there's not going to be masses and masses of things that we know of currently that are going to be able to one-shot an Arcanine. So Raging Claws is actually going to be a really nice attack for trying to maybe finish something off after you've used Bright Flame, which is for 3 fire, does 250 and discards 2 energy from this Pokemon. So obviously we still don't know breakpoints and numbers and stuff, but evidently 250 is very close to 280, so I'm sure at some point we're going to be getting some kind of damage mod like we have with Choice Belt and stuff. Really good numbers. You're discarding some energy. Realistically, you're probably taking a hit and then maybe able to close something out with an extra prize with a Raging Claws. So, a pretty cool Pokemon. The one thing me and Joe have both said about this, though, is it seems really fair and really not that exciting. So, again, this is only the first card we're seeing revealed, and obviously there's going to be plenty more. This is going to be a big set because it's made up of 2 sets. And also, all of this information was kind of leaked a little bit earlier than expected. So when I believe it's actually meant to come out on Friday, as of when we're recording this, which is in a couple of days. So we could see even more information come out on Friday that was actually meant to be released alongside this. But as of right now, this just seems like a pretty fair card. It seems good, but nothing sort of overwhelming. And if anything, the Terastal mechanics seem a bit underwhelming. So yeah, we're going to have to wait and see how this sort of turns out. It's going to be interesting, but yeah, I think everything else I really like. I really like the card. I like the fact that you can tell this has been this Arcanine has used or has terastalized. It looks crystally. I think these are going to look really nice in person as well.
I think so. Yeah, I think so too. I think these will probably be like the VMAX slot as well, right? Probably the rarest things in our boxes, more than likely, like one a box for a Terastal EX, maybe.
I expect so. So it's got the double R thing.
They share the same rarity. Yeah, I looked as well just a moment ago. But I think in terms of our pack composition, it will probably be similar, I would imagine.
I think, Western packs will probably have, because typically you get, 4 or 5 Vs and then 1 or 2 V stars or V maxes or whatever. I can definitely see that. Because, these, like, just comparing this to the Miraidon that we'll look at in a second, you can tell, I mean, the quality is slightly different anyway, but you can tell the sort of the pore of the Arcanine looks crystally and looks textures and stuff, whereas this just looks like one of the generic sort of shiny cards. So, yeah, I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of set composition as well.
But Terastal's an interesting one because there were many ancient traits that really didn't affect the card or make it anything. There were some ancient traits that completely made the card what it was. Yeah. Or was the reason it saw any play, and sometimes it was just kind of that cherry on top on an already good card. This one's more of that sort of cherry on top on a reasonable statted mon. But yeah, I think everything that we're looking at today is just demonstrating the new era, and none of it is necessarily going to be the cards we actually play with. Yeah. But I do like that you touched on 280 not being the same number, really. Even though you see 280 on this card and 280 on a V-Star, because of Choice Belt right now, it's not the same thing. So 280 is actually a slightly bigger number right now. And there will be that strange interaction when we're midway between Sun Shield and Scarlet Violet, where there's going to be V and EX interactions with each other. And that's another thing that we just have to bear in mind when we're looking at these sorts of things. The fact that this can't get serened and whatnot, for example. Just inherent strengths of this new text that we have on the EXs that is kind of like that hidden value that we're not always seeing. So even though this is still very fairly statted as a Pokemon, it still has a lot of things going for it, especially the fact that Bright Flame discards 2. You keep 1 on yourself, so you're still threatening a Raging Claws if the opponent's not moving out the active. So even though it's still on that fairer side of things, it still could be viable, even if we just see a couple bits of support come out from the set.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's realistically that was like the big reveal today, right? But we've got a few other cards too. We've had some clarifications on a few other cards here and there. This Magnezone was revealed back at Worlds as well, or sort of partially revealed. But we'll just take another quick look at it. 330 HP. So yeah, the other point worth mentioning about the HPs is obviously 280 is bigger naturally because of the sort of the Choice Belt thing, but also it's also bigger because we're going to have stage 2s, potentially you're going to have stage 2s in the format that obviously boast huge HP, VMAX level HP, and a lot of the time VMAXs aren't really being one-shot outside of weakness. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of different breakpoints to think about, which is going to be quite interesting in terms of working out whether a card is necessarily going to be viable or not, and then working out the partners for a card, because maybe you've got a card that's really good at dealing with the basics in the stage 1-2 prizes because it can reach that sort of 270, 280, but you're going to need to pair it with something to be able to try and push it to all the way to that 330, or whether your deck's going to be happy two-shotting through them and that kind of thing. So yeah, going to be really interesting. I like that they're pushing, there's an evident difference between stage 2s and stage 1s though in terms of HP. Like 50 HP is a big difference, and it means that you are, obviously we're still going to see a Magneton that will probably have like 100 HP or whatever, so there's still going to be a massive disparity there, but you can tell like you are now getting something for pushing that extra step and making it all the way to stage 2. You are getting a significant sort of buff in terms of additional HP, which is cool.
Yeah, and essentially the Magnezone in terms of its attacks are completely based on the format that we're in. Yeah. If there's still going to be like Lugia-style decks, obviously this is really good because A, it's lightning, and B, Lugia needs a ton of energy on all its stuff. Yes. But it's a wait and see, really, because if there's very efficient EXs, Energy Crush is kind of useless. So yeah.
We've got a Poor Me, again, great art. A lot of the basics, realistically, are just, I feel like they're just sort of introducing
stepping stones.
Some of the Pokemon, Miraidon EX, we now have the full scan of Miraidon. which was something that we kind of mentioned. We mentioned that the ability initially didn't seem to have sort of an ambiguous space for a type, and indeed it was because they hadn't officially revealed Miraidon and Koraidon's types yet. So Miraidon is a Lightning and Dragon type, and therefore Tandem Unit searches for 2 basic Lightning Pokemon and puts them onto the bench. So really, really good Lightning support. Joe and I were just chatting before about this alongside Flaffy and maybe Regieleki being its own deck and being, again, a deck that sounds like it's not doing anything super unfair, but it sounds like it can do something quite consistent with Tandem Unit in terms of being able to get your basics out, which is the best thing you can do in terms of an evolution deck is being able to get your basics out. 1, just because you need to have them early to evolve them, but 2, thinning the deck out of other cards that you don't want to see before you're then researching or whatever. So, again, feels quite fair, but feels quite consistent, which is usually quite a good recipe for a successful deck. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see whether there's any other lightning types we maybe want to latch onto this. And then Photon Blaster for 3 energy, doing 220, with a couple of Alekis obviously pushing up to 280, which again is already one of these numbers that we've talked about being an important breakpoint. So yeah, really, really interesting stuff. Nothing like this is obviously a really, really strong ability because it's limited to a type. It's not going to be thrown as a splashable card and everything, which is probably good in terms of deck composition and deck building and stuff. It's not an immediate addition to everything like things like Shaman and Hooper were in the past. So yeah, some nice support for lightning types. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see whether this basically the consistency of Tandem Unit alone pushes this to be a deck.
Yeah, but even in the worst case scenario, we have the Magnezone EX and there's also an Ampharos EX that we'll look at, and this is like a guaranteed one of I foresee in those decks just because it keeps that stage 2 chain just so much more reliably. It makes like the ordinary rod so much more valuable because you get instant access again to the basic that you've just thrown back in the deck and that sort of thing. That value that you get throughout the game, even if this never attacks once, is huge. And I like what you were saying about the different breakpoints that we need to hit certain EXs and whatnot. And this could be that basic Pokemon that you use to deal with other basic EXs, or like sometimes even push itself into stage 1 EXs at times. And then you have your other toolkit already for higher hit point things. So it just seems like a very strong card for Lightning, no doubt.
For sure. Definitely. Koraidon as well seems very, very strong. 230 HP, so again, similar sort of range. We've got Dino Cry as the ability that lets you search for 2, or lets you attach up to 2 basic fighting energy cards from your discard pile to your basic fighting Pokemon any way you like, and then your turn ends. Again, really, really good energy acceleration. A little bit more convoluted because you've got to get the basics into the bin, and obviously then your turn ends as well. So maybe not quite as splashable or quite as useful in the mid to late game compared to Miraidon, but really good for trying to just steal that tempo early with an additional couple of attachments. I think the biggest thing is probably going to be working out what we're going to be attaching to. Obviously, you can attach to the Koraidon, which is fine. Again, a pretty efficient attack, like Joe said, in terms of these cards are really good at dealing with some of the lower to the ground 2 prizes. And I can definitely see decks, like you say, having a composition of a couple of basics to deal with basics, but built around a stage 2 to deal with other stage 2s. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. The biggest thing will be sort of working out what we're attaching to and working out the best way of getting these energy into the discard pile as early as possible, because realistically you don't want to be ending your turn after sort of probably the second turn of the game realistically. So you're going to need to work out the best way of doing that, but we can hopefully do that and find some good partners. There's a couple of ones. There's a Lucario that we'll talk about in a moment, but more interestingly, there's actually the old Lucario V-Stars and stuff that maybe are actually a little bit better, and maybe you're just playing the Lucario EX as another optional attacker. So yeah, the biggest thing will be working out the partners for this, but seems again like a really, really strong card, and that's a huge amount of tempo in the first couple of turns of the game, especially if the format does seem to be taking a little bit of a slower sort of direction. That's again where tempo, you're really, really happy to see these kind of tempo plays, because you're going to be able to really try and push your opponent out of the game if you're getting maybe even 4 additional energy attachments compared to them.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people won't be blown away by a ton of these new cards, but you have to remember we're in the most generous card pool I think we've ever been in the TCG. So the fact that rotation slams at the same time as we get all these cards, these effects will feel a lot more powerful in play when we have them,
Yeah.
because we'll be losing a lot of like other consistency pieces and things that are currently in format that you may think like do this job or something similar but better. Like comparing this to Zacian doesn't feel that strong. I know it's guaranteed energy, but it's not like cards or anything like that. And you need to do a lot of the prep work. So just like on that face value, it doesn't seem anywhere near as good, but we're going to be losing cards like that. So I feel like this could easily still see a ton of play just because it's early ramp to something, even if it is at the moment just like a Hisuian Arcanine with a cape and stuff like that. You know, I think it can still find its way to be a deck just when rotation hits. And fighting is always relevant typing, especially if Miraidon decks will be some of the more consistent performers. Just being fighting could be a relevant thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, definitely. It's always weird after rotation because it really feels like decks take a step back, and also I don't think that's going to be as big with this one because rotation's been a little bit later. We're going to have like an additional set or two compared to if we've rotated in September like we usually would. But even so, like we will still probably see a lot of decks really sort of dumb it down and get simpler again before they get to the point where you've got Inteleon engines with 18 different one-ofs, and you've got Lugia engines with sort of a variety of different special energy because they can play like eight or nine different types of special energy because there's so many in the format to do all these different things. You know, it really feels like just something as simple as Koraidon and Arcanine sounds really boring and really fair, but it might just be better than everything else because you're able to just present a 280 HP Pokemon that's dealing a lot of damage every turn very consistently.
Right.
So yeah, rotation is always weird with cards like these. It seems, like you say, it's very difficult to evaluate, especially whilst we have a good idea of what rotation is going to be. This set is going to be massive, and like Joe and I definitely haven't done enough sort of looking at exactly what rotation is going to do yet, that it's really difficult to work out exactly where a lot of these cards are going to place immediately. So it's a weird one. We've got
Look at him.
Yeah, we've got a Lechonk with Joe's favourite attack that we've seen. Repulsive Stench is a brilliant name of an attack. He's great art as well. He's just brilliant, isn't he?
He's just perfect in every way.
Yeah. We have research reprints, 2 research reprints, one for Scarlet, one for Violet. We've got Turo and Sada. Yeah, again, I think not really surprised to see them reprinted. It's probably we were discussing before the video. It's probably research is probably in the vacuum of the format it's in the worst it's ever been in terms of prints into like sort of compared to Juniper or Sycamore, but still obviously evidently a very, very strong card, but not as warping as it has been in the past. We've still got Irida engines, we've still got sort of Mew playing none. There's a variety of different engines, so I don't hate seeing this. I'm not the biggest fan of seeing it because I way prefer Tutor to draw, but I'd rather have good supporters than no supporters.
I think they, in fairness to Sword and Shield, I think they got a lot right with the supporter mechanic change, but also just like the variety of supporters and engines they gave us meant that we weren't constantly dump and drawing and panting for your next research. And if you just didn't hit your next one, you're just going to lose. There's been a ton of large periods of the game where research wasn't in any deck, and even if it was, it would be like a 1 or 2 count just because you had Tutor and wanted that deeper dig. So just because we have Ultra Ball and Research for another 2 years or whatever, doesn't mean that we're going to be playing 4 of them in every deck, despite, the history has told us that this is one of the strongest supports of all time. And it's still the case that it will be really strong for some builds. But I think throughout the Sword and Shield block, they've shown that we can have other successful engines that, even though they don't draw specifically as many cards, we have things like the Irida engine and all these other supporter engines that have overtaken that and different methods of draw. That really gives me hope that these aren't going to be the be-all and end-all forever just because they're called Professor's Research and will essentially never rotate now. I don't think it's wrong that we start having some more like eternal cards, I guess, alongside like Switch and whatever else, because these seem like strong at times and the strongest at times, but can in other periods sort of take a backseat approach. So I'm fine with them being in the game, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I guess rotation, we actually don't lose realistically many supporters at all. We lose like Marnie as the most relevant one.
Yeah, Marnie's
But
huge.
Boss
then
has
it's like
been
Bird Keeper.
yeah, Boss has been reprinted. Obviously, Research has been reprinted. Irida and all of that kind of stuff was later.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
it's literally Marnie Bird Keeper, I think. And
yeah,
like
there's not going to be
something.
There's not going to be masses different, which is again probably also a good thing in terms of making sure, because the other thing that sort of suffers when we have rotation is all of a sudden decks get way less consistent, and it just becomes, for like a set or two, it just becomes whoever was lucky enough to find an extra ball search card or an extra supporter because the kind of supporters we have to play and that kind of stuff is just so pants. So I'd way rather have far too many and research be one of them than far too little and have to sacrifice research. I'd rather much rather be able to play the game than
Don't you want to play the Sword and Shield VIP Pass Roulette, Jack? That's what I've signed up for.
Oh God. We do, interestingly, we do lose Quick Ball and Evo Incense, which I think is pretty big.
Right.
And we're evidently getting an Ultra Ball reprint, but that wasn't going anywhere anyway. So it will be interesting to see whether we get another Ball Search card alongside this, or whether that will be the biggest thing, because
I really hope so, because we lose Capture as well.
Yeah, we could still lose a lot of Pokemon Search, which is a bit worrying, and again further pushes things like Tandem Unit into the forefront. It that will make Miraidon again even stronger, because having
if that's the selling point of this deck, like it could well be that we don't get a Ball Search card, and then the whole selling point of Miraidon is you're the setup deck that actually sets up.
Yeah, everything about the card is fairly fair, but you actually get to do it every game, so you win because of that.
And we didn't touch on the chain ability, but you can go Miraidon for Miraidon plus X, and then use the Miraidon you just searched out to go again, because it doesn't stop. So it's interesting. I hope that's not the case. I'd much rather everyone be able to play the game, but if not, I'll probably be at the forefront of actually playing the Miraidon deck to play the game. But yeah, interesting that they've decided to show an Ultra Ball reprint as the first Ball Search card. I am completely in agreement with you. I'm really hoping we're going to see some kind of Ball Search reprint as well, or just Ball Search card at some point. Again, we've got loads of cards to see, so I'm not overly worried yet. But I mean, Pokecom is always in a evolution format. I think Pokecom is one of my favorite cards to have in the format.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see that come back, because it strikes that balance of being a card that doesn't fall off and still a reasonably strong card in your opening hands most of the time, especially in stage 1 and 2 base decks where your deck is 18 Pokemon minimum, so you have really good odds of it being live.
Definitely. So yeah, I'm not overly worried, but it's just a little it's a little bit bizarre to me to reveal an Ultra Ball reprint when we knew Ultra Ball wasn't going anywhere for 2 years anyway. So hopefully we're going to get something else as well. And then Beach Court is the stadium that they showed off. The retreat cost of each player's basic Pokemon is colorless less, so essentially it's Sky Arrow Bridge, which again was just another brilliant stadium to just have. It wasn't unfair for anyone in any way. It was just very fair and very happy for everyone to be able to play the game a little bit more, which is really nice. Joe mentioned earlier on to me that it's also a really nice pickup for something like the Lost Zone decks, which lose Air Balloon, they lose Bird Keeper, they lose Scoop Up Net, they lose all of these different switching outs, and obviously want to be chaining Conphase. So this is a nice way of doing that. Again, we've still got Switch Car and Rope as well, so still a few, but having an additional one is nice. But yeah, just a really nice stadium to have. We lose the generic training court stadium that decks just sort of played if they needed to play some stadiums, but there wasn't a particularly good one to play. And I think this is a great replacement because it's just it's a very, very fair effect for everyone. Also helps in kind of a training court way in terms of retaining energy as well, which is nice. So yeah, just a great card to see reprinted, to be honest.
Yeah, it's one of those everyone's a winner cards, so you have to be a little bit careful so your opponent isn't getting more advantage than you. But obviously, if you're putting it in your deck, you're trying to get as much value out of it as possible. And it could even lead to some almost like a low and Vulpix style attacks. At the moment, we have Hisuian Basculin and stuff like that. When you give your little basic that's trying to become a stage 2, when you get that out of the active, protect it and get value out of some other free energy attacks or one energy attacks, it's obviously an enabler for that, which I think is also pretty huge.
Yeah, I think it would be nice. It feels like the last time we really had stage 2, like a stage 2 kind of format, was back when sort of Guardi GX was a big thing. We had some after that, but like that one really sticks out to me, and that was a time where decks were playing like Guardi and all of the
retreat
all of the
into
stuff.
something.
But, yeah, they were then playing stuff like the Vulpix, the Diancie, all of these setup Pokemon, and that's it's sort of the perfect storm for a card like Beach Court to see play as well, which is really nice. So yeah, they're the main set cards. There's also a couple of additional sort of starter set cards. These again are the ones that generally seem to be a little bit weaker because they're more for introducing new players into the mechanic. So they're a little bit weaker. We've got a Sprigatito and a Riolu, and then a Lucario EX, which again was sort of leaked or half revealed back at Worlds. 260 HP, 2 for 60, and then 3 for a 160 plus 50 snipe. Again, seems pretty fair, to be honest. I think largely underwhelming compared to Lucario V-Star, but both evolve from you could play a deck with both theoretically, because you've got like decent acceleration for fighting types now in Koraidon. So yeah, it could be a nice addition. I don't think realistically it's going to be doing too much though. It's just a little bit too fair. Great art on Fuecoco. I think this is my favourite art.
This is a treat, isn't it?
He's just chilling on a hill. He's happy.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
Love him. I think your favourite is the Flaffy that we see here.
This artwork is great. Like, give me that in a plush form. Like, the exact pose right there, the exact fluffness, and I'm in.
Yeah, definitely down for that. And an Ampharos EX that's basically worth noting because it evolves from Flaffy, and we obviously have the Dynamo to Flaffy. I think this is the most impressive of the 3 starter EXs because, you're able to sort of almost inconspicuously attach an energy or two to your Flaffies, and not really your opponent's having to deal with the Miraidon or whatever that's hitting them in the face. And you're just getting an additional attachment here and there, and then you can evolve late game into your Flaffy into an Ampharos EX and use Lightning Tail, which can do up to 240. I think realistically, the numbers aren't quite good enough to be able to push for a one-shot with this, plus some Elekis. You'd probably have to have 3 Elekis out realistically, and that's going to be quite hard to do.
Elekis are basics, yeah.
Oh, yeah, true.
Only basics.
So realistically, you're probably going to be hitting once and then trying to close out a KO afterwards. But
I think it's trying to be that sponge, right? That's the thing. Because it's just we're so used to having to hit a number in the game right now, and the game just completely changes when we have so many different breakpoints. So just having this card in your deck to be a sponge that finishes something off with that 140 hit and then stays on the board for a turn and then can burn its energy and do stuff, just seems quite valuable. I don't think this card necessarily makes it, but because it's part of a Blessed Evolution line, it could end up being that like 4/4/1, just because 330 is an annoying number, or could be an annoying number for some decks in general.
Yeah.
So even though this doesn't have insane stats, just the big number in the top right means it could see some play.
Yeah, and again, like we say, variable damage as well is also usually pretty
good for one prizes.
Like this. And again, don't discount someone like Roxanning you and then putting a 330 HP Pokemon in your face, because
exactly
that will buy them at least a turn, maybe even 2 turns. And realistically, because of the damage this does, if they're throwing up an Ampharos, this is probably taking 2 prizes. So Roxanne plus Ampharos, or Roxanne plus big HP, I expect will probably be quite a big thing for the first little while of this format if some of these stage 2s actually are viable. So yeah, that's definitely going to be worth noting. Another great art in Quaxley. Look at him just chilling in the...
All 3 of the little starters have grown on me so much. I genuinely love the trio.
I think this is one of my favourite trios, realistically. I'm not the biggest fan of any of the evolutions, but as the basics, I think the trio is...
I'm happy with at least 2 of them now. There's only one that I still dislike.
And finally, a Mimikyu EX. I think the most notable thing is just kind of giving us a bit of an idea of the range that some of these basic 2 prizes.
This has to be a small end, right? This has to be a lower end.
So I think we're looking
Koraidon was 230, right?
Yeah,
so that's probably the higher end.
So I think we're basically looking at V Pokemon again. So I think EXs are basically V Pokemon. Stage 1s are basically V Stars. and stage 2s are basically VMAXs, maybe even with a little bit of a push.
A good way of thinking about it, yeah.
Realistically, the card is pretty pants, to be honest. It's just too much.
I would be hoping with this level of number of hit points on the lower end stuff, it's probably going to be like ability-based stuff more often than not, like your Crobats, your Fish, that sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%.
For future prints of this, but yeah, nothing inspiring in terms of the attacks for this guy.
Yeah, and then we've got a reprint of our trusty draw 3 on Nimona. Which is a shame because I think Nimona is one of the best rivals we've had in a little while, and they've relegated her to hop and howl.
She's just
levels.
a rival, isn't she? You know.
And then finally, Cyclozari X, which is a real disappointment because I think Cyclozari is also a brilliant Pokemon. But
and kind of story relevant, maybe a little bit at least.
Yeah,
like he definitely has something different than just being a bog Pokemon in the region, I think.
Yeah, for sure. He reminds me of like a Lucario or an Absol or something that's just a little bit more. If it was a little bit more important than a generic Pokemon in the region,
like a Knuckle Stack or something.
Yeah,
So they're not the same.
But unfortunately, he's been tainted with sort of the bulk brush power run does 30, and you get to an attachment energy, but it's to this Pokemon, which is a bit unfortunate given that you're so fragile, and then 180 and can't attack next turn. Again, none of these Pokemon or none of these cards are sort of overwhelming, but I'm not overly worried yet because evidently these are the kinds of cards that we're going to be seeing. We're going to be seeing things that are pushing HP, that have great attacks. Like, compare these. These are like the Zacian and Zamazenta compared to, like, you know, Keldeo V and Victini V, which saw minor play here and there, but realistically, they were introducing us to the V mechanic, and then Zacian and Zamazenta were pushing the boat out of this is what a V could do.
Sure.
And it feels the exact same here. So I'm not overly worried.
No, not at all.
I think the biggest sort of question mark from today is just where do we go with the Terastal mechanic? Is this all it is? Is this one line here all it is, or is there more to it? So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm expecting, like we said, because this feels like our V Stars or V Maxes, I'm expecting to see sort of 2 or 3 a set, and because this is going to be 2 sets combined, I'm expecting to see maybe 5 or 6 different Terastal Pokemon. So.
I think 5 or 6. Well, I wasn't thinking that many, but yeah.
I think we could.
I guess you're right. The way you just explained.
Well, there's 78 cards in each set.
Yeah.
Maybe 4, maybe not 6.
Yeah, I think 4 is a fair guess.
So yeah, going to be interesting to see. Very exciting.
It's weird that they went with Arcanine though. I'd have thought. I guess they don't want to show things that are brand new with weird hats on in case it confuses people. Maybe that's the reason why.
Potentially. I'd
have thought they'd have put, a new gen Pokemon Terastalized, but maybe they'll wait a set or 2 to start doing that, so that people get to grips with the new cards. Because I guess as a marketing team, they have to not expect everyone to play the video game, so they have to expect that this could be the first exposure to some of these Pokemon.
Yeah,
so they have to see them in their normal forms first.
I also think it's probably relevant in terms of keeping people who are very disengaged still engaged, because obviously Arcanine is such a fan favorite. Like,
yeah, he's a treat. Don't get me wrong. I'm buzzing that it was an Arcanine that we saw.
There will be collectors that will be now interested in this set purely because this is an Arcanine and not, a random fire type that was introduced in this gen, because they have no sort of... So I would imagine it's a multitude of things. But yeah, it's bizarre that the first one they reveal isn't, a new Pokemon for whatever reason. But again, it could be that on Friday we actually see the full trailer and there's way more in the trailer, and we get another one that it all makes a little bit more sense. We'll have to wait and see.
The early scoop coming in.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get really much else, because I think the trailer was fully revealed and then just basically privated as a video. So I think we've probably seen everything we're going to see. But I think the one thing I think what we're most likely to see is actually any kind of indication on turn 1 rule changes or anything like that.
Or some rule box context. Yeah,
that will be expressed probably via like the Japanese websites on the release day, rather than just through a video accidentally getting leaked, right? So I'm not expecting too many more cards on Friday, but I'm quietly hopeful that we might find out something about, like you say, turn 1 rules or supporter rules or rule box rules or something like that. If there is anything, it could be that there's like absolutely nothing changing, regardless. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think there's a lot of confusion about this puppy right now, but we will hopefully see some more soon. And yeah, I mean, the set's out in Japan in 5 weeks, and then out in the West in 9 weeks. So we really don't have long to wait, which is pretty crazy.
Really exciting stuff. Even though we've had a lot of vanilla, I really like that Terastal is going to be this extra bit of text that your opponent can't really stop. I think Ancient Traits were awesome, and it was a short-lived space.
Yeah.
But there's a lot they can do. They can make it minor. They can make it massive for certain cards if they really want to push them. And I just really think it's a cool design space for them to go into, where they have very few restrictions. So sounds really cool to me. And nothing's made me terrified of the game with power creep either, from what we've seen. So that's also really good.
Yeah, it all feels like Miraidon and Koraidon don't feel that fair, but obviously you have to have cards that are going to be good and going to be selling points. And these feel fantastic, but they don't feel as absurd as Zacian did when we first saw Zacian, which is somewhat...
Oh my god, I mean, I literally lost my mind with Zacian.
Yeah, it's somewhat reassuring that...
There was context that ADP was already out, but even without seeing that, you just knew that, like, card draw on a basic that could also be accelerated to was, like, so disgusting.
Yeah, I'm feeling way more comfortable with what we've seen today in terms of not feeling like in 6 months' time we're going to be playing a completely different game, which really, at points... Especially because it reintroduced research and Marnie and all of this stuff that wasn't... I don't want to say was lacking, but it was just a very different... It feels like it was a very stark difference. Like, if you look at a 12-month time period between a couple of sets pre-Sword and Shield and post-Sword and Shield, the game was just completely different. Mm-hmm. But nothing so far has made me worry like that, so that's good. Obviously, I'm going to be eating my words when we see a Guzma reprint or something in a month's time, but hey,
there's going to be some scuffed Terastals, I'm sure.
But we will cover all of that when it comes out. For now, unless there's anything else to say, I'm pretty sure.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Alrighty. Thanks very much for watching. I've been Jack with Joe from OmniPoke, and we will see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers, everyone.